Hey, this is Ali Amagasu, welcoming you to episode 28 of Cloud Unfiltered. I'm here today with my co-host Valerie Benencosa. Val? And today's guest is Ben Kepes, a longtime involved entity in the cloud world. He has been a writer. Many of us know him as a writer. He's also an investor, and he's on panels. He's kind of everywhere. And part of the reason I'm excited about having him on today is because he gives us a really different view. Many people who are on are working on a project, or they work for a company. They have a very narrow view. Ben's kind of everywhere. He's seeing things from, I'd say, maybe a more neutral point of view and from a higher level than the rest of us. And I think that's a really valuable perspective to introduce, rather than somebody who's so down in the weeds and close to everything that they can't really be objective, which I include myself and my co-host in that from time to time.
Absolutely.
So Ben, welcome. Thank you for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you for the invitation.
Sure. I'd like to start off before we get into the discussion about the cloud, just to let folks get to know you. I know that running is a passion of yours, and there's many people for whom running is a passion, but they're not this extreme. Can you tell folks what you were just doing this last weekend?
Yeah, so I've been a runner now for about a decade, and I guess I'm middle age, and I've got that eternal fear of being that sort of white, fat, balding dude. I can't control my color or my hair loss, but I can control the fat part. So I've got more and more into my running, and now I do ultra running. So I do ultra trail running, and so just this last weekend I finished it was meant to be a 100-mile running race. It ended up being about 103 miles, which was pretty epic, but awesome to get through it.
And with how many feet of elevation or kilometers of elevation?
Yeah, so it had about 25,000 feet of elevation gain. So it was pretty full on and pretty technical.
And how long did that take you?
Yeah, so it took me 29 hours. So I was kind of pleased to go below the 30 hours, but there was definitely, towards the end, there was a few dark places, quite a lot of tears. The old emotions were running kind of crazy, but it was good to get through it.
Dude, I can't even imagine.
I know.
Hey, so Ben, I mean, tell us about yourself. Like, how did you become this guy who writes all these, very insightful articles on clouds and investing and all the other cool things that you're doing? I mean, what got you there? I mean, tell us how you became Ben.
Yeah, so I've had a super circuitous route into this kind of industry. I'm not a geek, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a developer. I dropped out of high school. I became an electrician. I got involved in a bunch of different businesses. I own a manufacturing business that makes like backpacks and outdoor clothing, workwear, and then started kind of having to deal with software, deal with technology. Started kind of writing about that, opining about that. This is about 10 years ago when Salesforce and Amazon were or Salesforce and AWS were starting. Started sort of writing about those, and I rode a wave. I was super lucky. My timing was serendipitous that the cloud was just starting, and I rode that wave. And I think that I'm lucky. Like Ali said before, because I don't have a real job, I don't have a day job. I don't kind of have to focus on any one thing, so I get to be super broad. And I think that I definitely lose a lot of deep technical understanding through that, but it brings another sort of breadth that is useful to people, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, so how are you keeping up with everything? How do you get like the insights that you do? Are you talking to people? I mean, what's the way that you've gone about this?
Yeah, so I obviously travel a ridiculous amount. I did 350,000 miles so far this calendar year. So I attend a huge number of conferences, and so I'm spending a bunch of time at those sorts of things. I do a bunch of reading. Like I say, I do a lot of other things involved with the businesses that I'm an investor in or owner of. But because I don't have a day job, I can spend a bunch of time during the day, reading and on the Twitters and just looking at what's going on in the world. And so that's kind of the way I guess try and keep up with what's going on.
That's excellent. So you mentioned that this all started for you about 10 years ago. And that brings up a good question. What have you seen, over that time as far as the evolution of the cloud? I know that even 2 or 3 years ago, it was being spoken about in a very different fashion. There were different stars of the show than there are right now. Kubernetes is the star, arguably, right now. A few years ago, it was OpenStack. I don't know what it was before then. I think there was a lot of vaporware and a lot of discussion about cloud, but not much as far as real solutions supporting it. So can you take us back and tell us how you've seen things change?
Yeah, it's really funny. And so one event that I used to go to every year was Cloud Connect, which was always happened at the Santa Clara Convention Center. And it was always kind of a bit of a reunion of all of the cloud folks. And I remember sitting there maybe in 2008, 2009, something like that, at Cloud Connect. And there was a presentation from one of the large traditional technology vendors that may or may not have a 3-letter acronym for a name. And this executive was up on stage kind of talking about the cloud, and it was just all FUD. It was like, cloud's not going to happen, it's not reliable, it's not going to work for any regulated industries. And I was thinking about that this morning when I saw the news that AWS has just launched a special secret region for intelligence agencies in the US, and to have come so far where every bank in the world, bar none, is using some kind of cloud infrastructure or some cloud software or some cloud solutions. Every regulated industry is doing that. It's kind of really nice to have been part of a tiny inconsequential part, but a part of a journey which has gone from absolutely this thing will not be, you are all freaks, you don't know what you're talking about, to now, kind of we were all right. And that sounds a little bit douchey, a little bit arrogant, but it's not so much that we were right. It's more, it's really interesting to have been a part of that journey with a bunch of really, really cool folks that I call friends.
It's interesting. Oh, we were actually right. So it's kind of interesting. I love that, right?
Well, and I feel like it's almost that instant stardom thing, because I felt like for a good part of that journey, it was talking about it and really it being pushed away and said, this isn't real. Even when it really was real and there were real customers out there using it, there was still a significant part. And now it seems like it just flipped so quickly to where everyone's got a cloud.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think we've met before at OpenStack Foundation Summits, and I think OpenStack is a good example of that. In that, one of my friends, Simon Wardley, is a very opinionated sort of cloud commentator, and his regular thing is that OpenStack is a dead duck. And it's really interesting to look at that in the context of what's happening with OpenStack, because frankly, when OpenStack first started, basically NASA and Rackspace said, this is going to be the Amazon killer. This is a chance for all of you to kill Amazon. Well, no one's going to kill Amazon in the near future, and it's not going to be, I suspect, an open source project, because Amazon is incredible and is doing amazing things. But just because OpenStack hasn't killed AWS doesn't mean that OpenStack isn't a real thing. It was really interesting at the last summit. I was there, and a lot of the vendors who we saw at the expo in the early days, the likes of HPE and IBM and Cisco, obviously, and Intel, none of them were there for all intents and purposes. But there was a huge number of other organizations there, from the US telcos to the large Chinese players, whether it's Chinese telcos, Chinese financial services companies, or Chinese cloud players. And so it's really interesting, to your point around, things get adopted even though the world's saying it's not happening, and then all of a sudden we wake up and say, oh, yeah, actually people are using it. And I kind of feel OpenStack's a little bit like that. People are still saying it's a dead duck.
Yeah. So
meanwhile, millions of people are using it.
So you're saying OpenStack's not dead and it still has a future?
Absolutely. The vendors and the startups that got into OpenStack because they thought it would be a chance for them to compete hugely successfully with Amazon in anything, with no differentiation other than the fact that it was OpenStack. Those ones have failed. But the ones who said, we want to build cloud-like infrastructures, whether that's eBay or PayPal, building their own private clouds, or whether it's someone like an OVH or someone building a regionally specific cloud. Those are absolutely valid use cases, and so OpenStack absolutely is a thing. Obviously, it's changing, as is every technology initiative under the sun, and who knows what it will be. But I think we need to be a little bit more circumspect. You know, the rise of social media has allowed us to polarize everything. Everything is black or white. Either a project is dead, or it is, you know, the best thing since sliced bread.
Amen.
And actually,
man. It's like the Star Wars Sith mentality. Sith
yeah, I
see
mean,
things
something can be neither of those, but can still be a thing, right? You know, it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to totally decimate the industry,
right.
to actually be successful.
Yeah, it can just have its niche where it's succeeding is fabulous for those companies. And you bringing up the summit makes me wonder, you know, as someone who wasn't there, I've been to 6 of them, but not that one. What was the highlight? What was the buzz going on at the OpenStack Summit this year? What were the best presentations you saw, or the most interesting things?
Well, I have to say it was really nice not having to fly like 25 hours to get to an OpenStack Summit. So it was in Sydney, so that was only a 3.5 flight for me. So that was good. It was really interesting. You know, there were some interesting things there because basically, you know, without going super into the weeds, the foundation has decided to give up this idea of the open tent, the big tent, where basically every orphan open source project that wanted a home could come to OpenStack and find that home. But at the same time, Jonathan Bryce, the executive director, told us about this new strategy, which is that OpenStack, the foundation, is going to be more than just the OpenStack cloud operating system. And I suspect that what the OpenStack Foundation is actually trying to do, to an extent, is almost take on Apache and Linux as kind of these umbrella open source foundations or organizations. And I think it sees itself as the Uber foundation, the Uber open source foundation for everything cloud. I would imagine that OpenStack really sees itself getting, you know, some container, you know, orchestration, operation type initiatives in there, some serverless initiatives in there. I'm not 100% convinced that that's going to work, because obviously CNCF is doing great things in the cloud native space, but it's very interesting from a positioning perspective.
So now they're not competing with Amazon; they're competing with Apache and Linux and the CNCF.
Yeah, it seems that is the case. It was really interesting. I talked with Boris Rensky, and as we all know, Boris Rensky is probably one of the most entertaining figures in the OpenStack, or the most entertaining figure in the OpenStack world, from Marantis. And he, I mean, I have to say, he looked like a wreck. It's been a hard year or two for Boris. But his take on it was, you know, I said to him, it seems like, you know, OpenStack is trying to take on CNCF and OCI and all these other things. And his take on it was that if anyone can be successful in being this cloud foundation, it is OpenStack and the team of, you know, Jonathan, Lauren, and Mark, which is, you know, it's unusual to hear Boris complimenting anyone. So that was an interesting take, and I'm sure those within the CNCF and Cloud Foundry Foundation and OCI will be somewhat bemused at that comment.
That is so funny. So I want to take a step back a second. You said that the foundation's moving away from the big tent concept. Does that mean they're going to kind of end of life some of the projects? Are they going to cull them in any way? Or are they simply not going to continue to embrace more and more new projects? Well,
frankly, I tend to be pretty outspoken about the big tent and all of those projects. I always remember when Project Solum was announced, which was a project that was, I think, Red Hat and a few other vendors got in because PaaS was becoming big, and all of a sudden OpenStack needed to be a PaaS.
Yeah.
I think all of those projects are orphaned, are dead. You know, the only thing that hasn't happened is the tombstone hasn't been set up. And so I think that'll just kind of happen. So I'm not so concerned about that. The reality is that no one was using them. Vendors were playing with them simply for commercial reasons, for their own commercial reasons, and they weren't actually a thing. So I think the end of the big tent is good, but the start of this new thing is unknown, I guess.
Interesting. Another thing you guys touched on just briefly was CNCF. And I did see a blog post of yours, or sorry, it was a Twitter post, talking about CNCF either certifying or approving something like 36 different Kubernetes distributions.
Yeah, trying to standardize them, or saying they're interoperable or something.
Yeah, so apparently my math was incorrect, and it was actually 32, but whatever. I'll give them the extra 4. But so that's interesting. I mean, I remember it was only a couple years ago that at the OpenStack Summit there was that in the keynote there was that demo where there was the huge long table where all of the different distros were showing that they were interoperable, and that was 5 years into OpenStack, and it had taken that long to actually get a workload to be able to work between distros, which is kind of crazy because OpenStack was always held up as one of the benefits of open source is that there isn't interoperability. And so yeah, CNCF were kind of cognizant about that, and with Kubernetes, they introduced this thing where there was a level of interoperability and certified interoperability that CNCF would actually certify, and yeah, 32 of these different organizations, from Amazon to Microsoft to Tencent to Alibaba to everyone, are supporting this interoperability. I mean, I do wonder, because I get caught up in the whole sort of Kubernetes thing because amazing, incredible uptake, interest, vendors, whatever, and that was exactly what happened with OpenStack 5 years ago, and none of that stuff was actually good for OpenStack. All it did was kind of lead it astray, and I do worry whether in 5 years' time we'll be saying, yeah, CNCF, that was just another debacle of a bunch of kind of orphan projects, and I mean, Kubernetes is awesome. Kubernetes, the project is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but I do worry that CNCF is trying to kind of again bring in, it's kind of trying to do the big tent of cloud native, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not.
Do you think Kubernetes will be more successful than OpenStack? If I don't know how to define success, but or do you think it's just destined to become the same thing?
So the issue for me is that like, let's look at the macro trend here. The macro trend here is that organizations need to move faster. That no one wants to think about infrastructure when they're building applications. They want all of that stuff to just dissolve into the ether. And so, virtualization, OpenStack, a virtualized platform, is absolutely quicker than racking and stacking physical servers, absolutely. But containers is quicker yet again. The thing that kind of I wonder about is that serverless is the next level of abstracting away your infrastructure, forgetting about those servers. And so, in a world where serverless all of a sudden becomes easy, doable, broadly understood, does that render Kubernetes or containers kind of where virtualization is now? And that's not to say that they're going to go and they're not going to be used, because clearly there's some workloads that need, there's some workloads that still need mainframes or physical servers or whatever. But I do wonder whether the new shiny thing is only shiny because we haven't found the new shiny thing, and I wonder whether serverless.
Well, it's a valid point. I mean, just like Red Hat introduced the Solemn to OpenStack, and now others have implemented different projects for Kubernetes to do serverless now, because that's the new thing, right?
Yeah, totally. And I do, I remember at an OpenStack Summit a few years ago where Alex Poley from CoreOS was demoing Stackinetes, which was Kubernetes on top of OpenStack, or OpenStack on top of Kubernetes, or some kind of turtles all the way down.
Yeah.
And I do wonder whether we're trying to shoehorn a solution into this kind of problem in easier ways to do it. I sort of worry about that a little bit.
So I'm going to pause for a second. As you guys are talking about serverless, I worry that we have a very technically savvy audience, but there may be some that are saying, well, what's serverless? What's the value proposition there? How does it work? Clearly we've needed servers for a long time, even when we abstract away from them. What is serverless? Can you take a moment, Ben, to explain what's the excitement around that?
Sure. So let's be honest here. There are still servers. Even in the cloud, there are still physical servers. We may have virtualized them, but there are still physical servers sitting somewhere. But the idea of serverless is that basically, I'm not a technical guy. I'm a super simple guy, so I always dumb things down. I think of it as something like a Zapier or an if this and that. That if this happens, if this trigger occurs, then take this action. And basically, it's taking that paradigm or that notion down to infrastructure. So if this trigger occurs, if this event happens, then I want this function to run. And that function obviously somewhere runs on a physical server, but I don't want to think about that. All I want to think about is the function that I actually want to kick off. And so that's what serverless is all about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anything to add, Val, from your point of view?
No, I want to know more. Ben, I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, predictions. I mean, what's actually happening now that is most interesting to you in all of these different cloud, stories that we hear on-prem, off-prem, wherever?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting because it is quite polarized. Because on the one hand, you have the SaaS vendors, whether it's Salesforce or a company like HelloSign that I've been doing some stuff with, that is actually delivering tools for business users to actually do, digital transformation is a cliched word, but to actually start putting digital process into what they do. And then on the other hand, we're all trying to suggest that, the shiniest new box, whether that's a real box or a virtual box or a container box or a serverless box, is all of a sudden digital transformation. And I totally understand that you can't, business people won't be able to do all of the stuff, that you will need to involve developers and you will need to involve IT.
No.
Probably a little bit that we're sort of gilding the lily a bit. We're calling what we do in the infrastructure space, digital transformation. And really all it is those same old physical servers in much smaller boxes, smaller achievable instances. So units of measure. But so I do kind of wonder about that stuff.
Which
didn't really answer your question.
Well, no, there's a brief part where you went out for a little bit, but just trying to restate that. So we're focused on the infrastructure. Are we missing the bigger business transformation? Am I? I don't think I got that right.
I mean, I dream of a world where a business person, has a process that she wants to happen, and she can use some really simple, what you see is what you get, kind of plug and play development framework to build that, and it just runs. Or a developer has an application that she wants to build, and she just creates that application using, whatever language or framework she wants to do, and it just happens. It just runs. And It seems to me like serverless is probably a better paradigm to realize that dream than even Kubernetes, and better again than virtual cloud, and better again than physical servers.
Yeah, just not caring about the operating system anymore, which is so much. I mean, even on containers, we still have to create an operating system, that it runs off of, right? So, yeah, it seems to be that's more of getting closer to that world that you dream of.
Well, it's funny, like I remember, 5 years ago when I got a new laptop, I would play with the settings and look at what the latest version of Windows could do for me or whatever. Or in the early days when I got a phone, I'd like the operating system updates, and I'd go into the settings and see what was new. And what do I do now? I open my app, or on my laptop, I open Chrome and I'm in my browser. And all of that, I don't care about the operating system. I am a Windows guy, frankly, because Windows machines are cheaper than Apple, and Michael Dell's a really nice guy, and he gives me the odd free laptop. But do I fundamentally think that my life with an Apple laptop would be different from a Windows laptop? No, because I live in Chrome. So that's my answer.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's more about, the app on top of it as compared to that underneath. I mean, it's funny because I've worked with some interns too, and I'm like, have you guys ever installed an operating system? And they're like, no, never done that. I'm like, really? So okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you one more question, if I may. You had an interesting post last week about Huawei, and I guess it was a conference that you were in. But one of these, some of these different maybe Eastern cloud providers that aren't getting as much attention, and that could be a big mistake for many people that they're not paying attention to them.
Yeah, so there's a really interesting thing. I mean, obviously, I live outside of the US, so I have a different perspective on things, maybe. But I went up to Kuala Lumpur to Huawei's Asian Innovation Day there, and they were talking about their cloud aspirations. And they're a massive organization. They've got 170,000 employees. They do, obviously we know about the devices, handsets and stuff they do, but they're in huge numbers of different areas. They're absolutely massive, basically everywhere apart from the US. And I think we do two things. One is that vendors from outside of the US see the US as their only sort of success metric. And so today I saw the news that OVH, which is a great French cloud computing vendor, is launching in the US because they bought the vCloud Air assets from VMware. And so they're launching into the US to do cloud computing in the US. Well, my feeling is that OVH has an absolutely fantastic value proposition in Europe because it's, European language, European provider, European data centers, European owned, the whole GDPR thing. It has a differentiation there. Does it have a differentiation in the US where it's going up against AWS and Microsoft and Google? No, it doesn't. And so that's the first mistake, is these vendors seeing US success as the determinant of overall success. But the second problem is that, putting on my kind of one foot in the Bay Area or one foot in the US kind of persona, in our industry, we kind of think that anyone from outside, anyone that isn't successful in the US is irrelevant. And so you look at the likes of Alibaba, who is an incredibly fast growing cloud computing provider that we kind of just ignore, or Huawei. With the stuff that Tencent's doing, there's some absolutely monstrous vendors. China and India together are 20 or 25% of the global population, and we kind of just ignore vendors from those countries. I mean, it's just absurd, really, when we think about it. So I think that I think it would be very much wrong to ignore those vendors, both because they are going very big, very quick, and they are going global, despite not being hugely in the US, but also because increasingly China, and to a lesser extent India, are sort of the global economic powerhouses, and those over the next decades will become increasingly important in the socio-political space. And so it's easy for us in the West to kind of think that the status quo will remain, but we should take a leaf from our own industry and see that what happened to Digital Equipment Corporation may well happen to US vendors generally, and we need to be sort of aware of what those other players are doing.
Yeah, what I thought was fascinating about that post about Huawei in Malaysia was that their approach to kind of locking this business in. They've gotten the government to sign all these memoranda of understanding. We're going to guide you through the Internet of Things for your transportation department, or for this department, or for that department. It was what it sounded like to me, and I thought, man, that's genius. What a way to lock people in and to ensure a long-term customer.
Well, I have to say, in fairness, it makes it a lot easier when you've got countries that don't really care about civil liberties. So, there was one demo there, which was an amazing demo about sort of crime prevention I think it was in one part of Shenzhen in China. And it was incredible and really effective. But basically the way they achieved that was by looking at every individual and tracing every individual and looking at where they were and who they were. And clearly that's something that would not fly. It certainly wouldn't fly in Europe.
Right.
It wouldn't even fly, at least if anyone knew about it in the US. So that definitely helps. But yeah, it is pretty amazing. I mean, what we saw at that event in Malaysia was was basically the Malaysian government saying, we can't do this. We could kind of play the field and talk to all the vendors, but frankly, Huawei, you're just over the border, you're 170,000 people. We are going to entrust you with our sort of whole digital transformation journey, and that is a pretty, it's a genius and at the same time obvious move from Huawei. And to be honest, it actually makes sense from Malaysia because those countries, there's always been a degree of business practices are different from the way they are in the West. There's a degree of corruption, a degree of greasing palms, and those sorts of things. Yes. And if you just accept that that's the way things are done, but you go into a relationship with a company like Huawei, knowing that that is the case, but there are going to be some benefits from that in terms of the digital transformation for your country, then maybe you find a happy place.
Hey,
I wonder.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I wonder. I mean, how does that play out in the next couple of years with them? I mean, as they get bigger, and certainly Amazon gets bigger, and I mean, all these just giant companies. I mean, what happens, and what could be a conflict, if any, of those?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, Amazon getting bigger, there's all of the antitrust stuff that may happen, in the US or in Europe because of that. I mean, the interesting thing will occur, and I kind of think, it's not a technology conversation, it's a geopolitical conversation. I mean, I think we are coming to a point where there will be a clash, and I don't mean a military clash, but there will be, socio-political clash between the East and the West, because, frankly, the East has spent, 100 years or at least 60 or 70 years post World War II being this good, subservient, basically the sweatshop for the West, making all our stuff for cheap, and doing not much else, and having a standard of living that is lower than we've enjoyed. Clearly, that is changing and has changed.
Yeah.
And when that reaches a critical mass, I mean, the fact of the matter is that China could turn around tomorrow and call in its debt and strong arm the West, and its vendors could be bigger than the West vendors. If and when that happens, we're going to be seeing a very different world, both from a technology and from a geopolitical perspective.
Wow, that's really interesting to think about. So what I was going to say is we're running up against the end of our time limit here, but we do always like to ask our guests, Ben, outside of cloud, it doesn't have to be just within cloud, but what's the new technology that's exciting to you? We're hearing a lot of talk about AI. What are you seeing coming? What new companies or new technologies are making you go, wow, that's interesting. I can't wait to see where that goes.
So I'm going to in my usual manner, I'm going to not answer that question, but answer a different one. So technology is amazing, and technology can do incredible things, and it's super exciting to see technology being applied to make the world a better place. But what it really excites me is people doing real things, and so I get super excited. Like as I said, I own a business that makes backpacks and outdoor clothing. So we employ real people making real products and real sewing machines. And so I think what we're going to see, and it kind of does relate to technology, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see the application of technology, but to create more personalized sort of artisanal experiences. And so I don't want to have stuff rammed down my throat that AI is kind of semi-personalizing but isn't really. What I want to do is I want to get something that is curated, that is created by someone that I can actually speak to, talk to, see, reach. And those sorts of experiences are what excite me. And so I think what we're going to see is we're going to see technology as an augmentation to the artisans out there. And we're already seeing it with, the local farmers market and community growers, embracing technologies to connect with their constituents or their stakeholders. But I think we'll see the increase of those sorts of things. And I think what we will see is us in the technology industry is where it's always been sort of the technology industry has been the sweaty, smelly geeks, and the business people have been over here. I actually hope that in our careers we see a bridge built between those two things, and we actually can be, we've always talked about being a partner to the business, but frankly we haven't ever been. I'd like to see that bridge get built and see technology actually augment what's happening across the board.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. And I know the kind of experiences you're talking about where technology is kind of a partner to some level of customization. And I think the fashion industry is a little bit ahead on that. And art too. I've had the number of amazing pieces of artwork I've had created by folks who I've connected with online through a marketplace. And then that artisan has worked with me and we've created something custom for an anniversary or a birthday or something like that. That sounds a little bit like what you were touching on, where you were getting to.
Yeah, totally. I mean, my wife, it's funny you talk about that, but my wife is a painter, oil painter, and she's starting to kind of embrace, you know, social platforms in order to reach her constituents. And just that feeling that someone on the other side of the world, someone from a different culture, can actually speak to an artist, to an artisan, and can actually have something created that is in context for them. It's kind of that taking that Renaissance sort of patronage approach, but
Yes.
doing it en masse, which is really nice.
That is nice. Yeah.
Hey, we really appreciate you being on, Ben, today. We are running out of time. I want to let everybody know before we leave where you'll be next, where you'll be on stage, where they can connect with you, and how they can get a hold of you on Twitter.
Sure. So I'm going to be at reInvent next week in Vegas, and then I'm done for the year, which is quite nice. But I've got a bunch of stuff on my plate for next year. But I'm always happy to engage with folks, and I'm Ben Kepes, BENKEPS on Twitter, and I'm always keen to have a chat.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, Val?
No, it's so great to meet you, Ben. Thanks for taking this time with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate your unique view on the industry. It's helpful to hear from someone who has that perspective. So thanks so much. We hope to have you on again someday. And for now, goodbye, everybody.